Are we ready, girls?
Yeah, let's do this, baby. Let's do it.
Hello. Oh, look, I'm not. Look, I was in the intro and he's still bloody got the bloody camera. What is that? Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Talking About Who. I'm going to do my Jar Jar Binks arm wave. Annoying. I'm Paul or P-Bal, and we are going to be discussing this week Doctor Who's season 14, and I am joined by.
Hello, it's James here.
And hello, it's Jason. Paul.
You have to laugh at yourself, dear. We do that for you.
No, I know. And I know there's plenty of laughing goes on. I have to say, I'm feeling terribly underdressed tonight. If
I told you I actually haven't got anything below the waist on, it would even everything up, wouldn't it?
Oh, you're playing to form.
I'm making everyone feel a little uncomfortable. So anyway, without further ado, we are going to kick off with our first story of the season, and it is Doctor Who and the Masque of Mandragora. So, who's going first then? Because I don't know if the viewer knows this, but there was a little bit of argy-bargy between James and Jason as to who went first on the last one, because Jason thought it was like a set ritual for it. So I'm closing it out there.
It's James's turn to go first, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, I will go first then, dear viewer, as Jason's not bothering today, apparently. So we start.
You mean generally or for the video?
We're dressed up for the occasion today, and Jason's. Anyway, we are in San Martino in 15th century, and yeah, just the opening of this season. There's a new Tardis console. So starts with the Doctor and Sarah sort of walking through the Tardis. They've got this wonderful sort of like huge room, which the Doctor sort of describes as a broom closet. You know, just sort of says, "Oh yeah, that's nothing." And then we find this sort of tertiary, secondary console room, and whilst they're there, they see this through the time vortex on the scanner, the helix, the Mandragora helix ball of energy.
I'm sorry. Are we going scene by scene? What is this?
What? I'm just starting us off. I'm just setting the scene.
Oh, I'll tell you what, your setting of the scene is longer than one of my roundups at the end of a story, man.
Well, then I will pass over to Jason then.
I've got nothing more to say. You said it all.
Oh, my days. Okay. Masque of Mandragora. I'm going to go straight on the line here and say that Masque of Mandragora is one of my favourite stories of all time. I adore it. I think it's interesting. Doctor Who does period so well. It's a sort of period that Doctor Who does well. It looks gorgeous. I think from the start, it looks gorgeous. Rodney Bennett is obviously well versed in this sort of period drama. He is the lighting in it. I think that there's such an epic feel to it. And Port Marion, I mean, Jason should be thrilled to see Port Marion on the screen here.
Absolutely.
It looks like they have gone, I mean, I suppose they have gone to a foreign country, but it looks like they've gone abroad and they've spent some money on this, and it looks beautiful. Even, I mean, they stuck oranges on trees for this, folks. It looks good.
I'll tell you what's the attention to detail. No, I agree with everything that P-Bal said there. I absolutely think that they pushed the boat out. You're right, the BBC do costume stuff like this really, really well. And none better, actually, than Doctor Who on a number of occasions. And we've said that a few times with some of our stories. I absolutely adore Port Marion. You're absolutely, it's for me, I know it, obviously, for the iconic series, The Prisoner, but I think it's put really to great use here. And you're right, Rodney Bennett, he uses the exteriors really well. He's got some great ideas when he's in studio. And this isn't an easy story, actually, because there's lots of lighting issues he's going to have here, because he's got the cavern, he's down in the sort of caverny sort of area, and you've got the sort of castle. And so I think it's really well executed. Not only an interior prop refresh for the TARDIS, but also an exterior prop refresh for the TARDIS in this story. So Barry Newbury steps in, and this is the now famous Newbury box that comes back in Legopolis. Not a fan of the Newbury box. For me, it's Brahaki all the way, and that would be my choice for any TARDIS that's come through the years. Okay, it's good, solid Doctor Who. This one, I'm not going to say it's up there in my top five. I'm not perhaps quite as much of a fan of it as P-Bal, but I think it's a very good start to the season, and I think that it's good, solid Doctor Who. So it's big thumbs up from me at the moment.
I'm thinking about the old TARDIS prop. They ditched it because it fell apart on Liz. Did it not fall on her?
It fell on their head when they were in it. So Tom and Liz were in the prop, and the roof caved in on them. So they decided to build a new one.
I'm glad Sato's here today.
But this is allegedly Liz was supposed to leave at the end of the last season, but she saw what they were planning for this story, and she asked to have her contract extended because of she really loved the idea of this story about sort of going back to Italy, the whole idea of the helix and what am I trying to say, the Hieronymus and the sort of seer, that kind of thing, the prophecy. So she really wanted to do this story. So she asked for a contract to be extended past the end of the last season.
I mean, we can only say that's a better benefit to us, because for me, the Tom and Liz combo, the team on board the TARDIS, for me is one of the definitives. And we weren't to know when we were watching this. Well, I watched this season originally, obviously, so we'll age it in a moment. But as a 6-year-old, impressionable 6-year-old watching this, I wouldn't have known that Liz was going to leave during this season. And that we'll talk about it in Hand of Fear, but any opportunity for her to stay, I was really pleased that was the case, that she managed to make it into this season. They really are a tour de force on screen, and you get that energy and that chemistry from them in pretty much every story. But it shows in this. I think it does show in this story that they really are bouncing well off each other. And Tom's enjoying himself. I mean, he's not at that stage where he's giving directors potentially the hardest of times just this early on. I think that comes a little later in this season, when he starts to perhaps tell the directors about some of the things he's not happy with. But you can see he's genuinely pleased that Liz is there, and that they're just getting on so well, I think. So, I'm glad she stayed for this and the following story.
I think as Liz told the story, so how true it is, she says that Philip came up to her on location and said, "So, how long are you thinking of stopping for?" And she took that as a sign that maybe he wasn't feeling it anymore. But she did a lot of dancing as a child, so she must have loved all the stuff with the masked ball at the end, that kind of stuff.
Isn't the masked ball well done though as well? I mean, again, kudos to the direction on this. The masked ball and the lead up to all those scenes. It's often you see the scene set and the sort of the tension mount in the earlier episodes, but episode 4 in this story is a real blister of a one, because it's everything just happens, madness. It's like the whole sort of the body count in episode 4 is quite high, actually.
Well, it's pretty much the whole brethren, isn't it, that gets absorbed. So yeah.
You also get Stuart Fell as the jester, so he gets a nice, because that's what he does. He still does to this day. So it's nice he gets to do that on screen, and you sort of see him doing that, and the fire wreath and all that. That's lovely. Guest cast is to die for on this one. John Lorrimore is clearly doing his Richard III. I love that he's gone with that, and he's like, it's big enough that it's big, but it's not into the comedy zone. I mean, he is doing his. I'm at the Globe, it's quite worthy, but I'm the villain. But then he's also got Norman Jones, who's like, well, you say that, but I'm also the villain here, and I can do the laser bolts. So there's a bit of a villain-off situation. But it gives, great. There's so many great lines, because obviously then he gets killed, and then it's like, well, what happened to him? He's like, well, Hieronymus gave him a blank look. It's a really cutting line. I love all this stuff in this. I love my favorite line, and nobody ever knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about it, is when the Doctor and Sarah sat on the step talking about what's the plan? What's Mandragora planning? Maybe he plans to take over the world of Flute with old Roman temples. I love that. I love those sorts of things. That's where I like it, because I think in this story, and you can see that it sort of develops more so from the last season, is Tom is playing the Doctor a bit more somber. The somber thing that sort of started to come in with the last season is ramping up a bit.
Yeah.
But Sarah's got that sort of sparky sarcasm that sort of diffuses it somehow. She's the humour that keeps it going and keeps it relatable. Like when he's got the metal chest on, and what do you think? Should I put on weight? It's great, and I think that's the chemistry. They are so at their peak here in the way they're batting off each other. Tom is getting to do his somber, and Liz is just being sparky and witty, and it's just sort of beautiful to watch.
But I think it underlines, how well their relationship on screen had got to by this stage. Tom is so well settled and owns this role now outright. They've had 2 really, really strong seasons to come into this. He's owning that role. And you're right, he's gone a little bit darker and the tone does start to darken down a bit. But I just think they're so comfortable around each other. So they could be playing it any which way, but they know how each other is going to act, I think, and behave, and how they're going to be together. So I think for me, it's the perfect companion Doctor setup throughout the whole of the series.
I mean, I don't know the chronology on it, but I presume as a press thing, they must have announced that she was going by this point. They must, because she'd have gone by filming terms. So I didn't know whether, because poor old Giuliano, there is a hint that Giuliano might be trying to marry her. I don't think it's going to be an in-depth marriage. He's quite close with Marco. I'm not casting aspersions, but I don't know whether Sarah would have ended up as a Renaissance beard. I don't know. Thankfully, she knew to get back in that TARDIS quick, didn't she? She knew there was a spin-off series that wouldn't be set in 15th century Italy.
So the line at the beginning where she talks about Croydon, so I think they must have known they were sowing the seeds at that point that she was thinking about going home. So I know we'll talk about that in the next one, but there was a discussion at the beginning about South Croydon and the Doctor making several jokes about it. So there is an element there that it was weaving.
Clearly leading up to it from the writing perspective, and in this story, she gets sort of drugged and hypnotized and is used, against her will. In the Hand of Fear, again, same thing. We'll talk about it later. So I think, again, and that's one of the reasons that I think she gives, so I'm fed up with this, blah, blah, blah. But I think they're playing to it now. I think they know that it's coming, and they're just putting these references into the script, I think, to try and ease us towards it.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of, in this season, quite a lot of sort of references to other things. There's the stories that have got really sort of lean heavily into different sort of types of stories. This one's Hamlet. This one is, you've got quite a Shakespearean setup that's going on, and you see different types of genre later on. When you come to some of the other stories like Agatha Christie and Sherlock Holmes, etc., there's a sort of flavour of sort of different things that they've brought in for this season that I find quite interesting.
I think Hinchcliffe's doing his Edgar Allan Poe here. Actually, I think this is his Masque of the Red Death, isn't it? As much as I adore a lot of Philip's stuff, a lot of it is very much rooted in things that have been taken from classical horror or your Hammers. It's sort of Hammer for a tea time audience, and that there's nothing wrong in that. I mean, if you can purloin it and make it work, then do it. I mean, put your spin on it.
But it gave us 3 great seasons. Let's face it. I mean, 12, 13. I mean, 13 in particular. We haven't reviewed that one yet. That'll be out soon, dear viewer. But 14 just carries it on. And you're right. It's obvious plagiarism to a degree, but it's done in such a nice. It's a clever way that it's done. So it isn't just a rewrite or a retell. They do twist it and they changed elements of it, but the essential the essential part of what he's based it on is still there. And you see it throughout this entire season, particularly, and obviously the previous ones. But yeah, I think it's clever. He tapped into something here and worked and used it pretty much all the way through, and it worked.
I think the only thing that I would say is slightly sad about Masque, it's not Masque's fault either, is that you have Tim Biggersmith, who's back from Claws of Axos. This is his second and final Doctor, one of the country's greatest actors, and he doesn't get a huge part in it. He's brilliant in what he does, and there's some nice bits, the little bits of torture bits. He does have some nice scenes in it. But it's a shame that he didn't get a part later. I mean, God, he got some brilliant parts that weren't in Doctor Who. But I mean, in a Doctor Who perspective, it's a shame that his parts in it weren't bigger. So it's a shame. But I mean, both him and Gareth, great. I don't think there is a bad performance in this. I think everyone is absolutely on the money. They're nodding now. They didn't like it when we started. I think I should run for Parliament. I should run for Parliament. I could do it.
It's because you're looking so smart this evening. We just trust everything you're saying.
I have to say, we have been thrown somewhat by this.
Yeah.
Well, when you paid up for your timeshare at the end of the video, then I'll be quid too, won't I? So, I mean, has James got any exciting facts he's made up of this?
Most of it we have covered already. So we talked about the new TARDIS interior, exterior, but there were also new font for the titles and for the end credits that stayed until Horns of Nymon. There we go.
Or Sharda, depending on how you look at it.
I miss the block font. I love Futura Bold. I think it's a fabulous font. And I wasn't a big fan when they changed this font as a little child, I have to tell you. I'm still not that.
You were into fonts as a child.
I was. That's why I was a font child.
Hang on. Watching this with your rabbit at 22 going, I don't like the font anymore.
Well, I got to be honest, I don't like the font in these seasons. I prefer the Futura Bold font. Always have done, always will do.
Did you react in the same way, like, all the teenage girls when Take That split up? Were you just like, I'm writing to the BBC now.
Don't let me change the font.
Okay.
So the question, therefore, I think, are we headed towards a score?
Oh, brilliant.
I'm surprised you didn't wear that throughout the whole of the review of the story.
No, I would love to. This dear viewer was cast by the lovely James. I can wear it, actually. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to think you were being parodied, Jason.
That's rude.
It's when he takes the mask off and it's Tom Baker underneath.
It's got the beard, the blank stare. It could have been used. Love it. Yeah. I wouldn't even say no to a salami sandwich. It's so quotable. I love this story. If you Marys mark this badly, there's going to be a rough.
Oh, my Lord. We've got Genesis Gate all over again coming up here, haven't we?
Okay. Let's see where we're at on the scores then.
Well, I think we know where you're going to be.
Got Jim Bowen, not Jimmy Savile.
No.
Okay, go on, Jason.
Okay, so a very solid start to the season. I'm really going to tell you now, it's not right up there. I'm not going to be piling in here with a 10. However, it's not a low score here either. Some great cast performances throughout. Pacey script, good direction, good start to the season. It's got Putmeyer in it, so for me, that's always going to be a bit of a bonus. Middle of a really solid start. So for me, just 7.5. Get us going on a 7.5.
Do you want to say middle of the road? Middle of the road.
Do you know what I loved about that, Jason? Is I could visibly see you recalculating your score. You've still said middle of the road, and then went
middle of the road.
Now middle of the road. Bearing in mind, the road could start at 5, and it could end at 10. So it could be middle of those two numbers. So 7.5. And that's where it came.
You might have a protest across your road in a minute, matey.
Oh, dear Lord. Look, I was never going to give this a 10. I'm going to be very honest here. It's a good, solid story, but I don't see some of the things that you see in it.
You know, you're going to have a blank stare now. Okay. James, where are you at on Doctor Who and the Catacombs of Death, as it was almost called?
Wow.
So yeah, it's a good story. It's fun. It goes along at some pace. There's lots of, like you say, lots of quotable bits in it. I slightly disagree with Jason, and I scored it slightly higher at 8.
I mean, it's only half a point higher.
I know it's only half a point, but
I was expecting there to be like 9.5 here or something. You were disagreeing with me and going 9.5 there is what I was expecting.
I'm not saying middle of the road. That's the thing.
Well, I was middle between a 5 and a 10. So, that's...
I do like to think that both of you have added about 2 points on there just through the fear of Hieronymus here. But anyway, we think it's never too early for a 10 from Shirley.
Ooh.
I am giving Masque 10. I love it. I literally love. Do you know, also, I mean, some of it could be slightly to blame that I should have perhaps done this before the scoring, is that it was one of the first 2 videos I had of the show. So I sort of got into it watching the Sea Devils repeat and stuff. So I had a Claws of Axos video. I mean, I had the Tim Pigott-Smith double bill, actually. I had the Claws of Axos VHS because it got Joe and the Doctor in it, and they'd just been on the telly. And I got Masque Mandragora because Mum and Dad thought I should have a 4th Doctor and Sarah Jane one. And, that was a very wise decision on their part. So 10 from me gives Masque Mandragora.
I have to say, no surprise there for a 10. And
not contrary at all.
Not at all.
Gives Masque Mandragora 25.5.
Good gracious, that's a very strong start.
That's a strong start.
That's a very strong start. Oh, it's going to take some beating, that is.
Or will it? As we move on to our second story, The Hand of Fear. Jason, that's more Claw of Axos, I think.
Is that a Claw of Axos? Don't get me started again on the Eye of Axos, is all I'll say.
No, you've not got enough tissues.
Okay. So, farewell, Sarah.
It must be, hang on, it must be Jason's turn to go first this time.
Oh, has he actually introduced the prize? Have you introduced which story it is?
Yes.
Okay.
God, he's too busy trying to work out whether the camera's gone back to him that he's not listening to the actual what's going on.
Okay, so farewell, Sarah Jane, but not before one last adventure. A fossilized hand buried deep in a quarry. Actually, for once, is a quarry, which I love the fact that they were in a quarry, finally. It wasn't a pretend planet. The Doctor and Sarah are into conflict with Eldrad and the owner of the hand there. So, do you know what? Again, we had a good strong start with Masque of Mandragora, and we're into Sarah's last story. And The Hand of Fear, for me, is also an extremely good story, and one that I actually do enjoy watching. Obviously, there's the fact that it's Sarah's last story, so that it has a certain place with me anyway. But actually, it's just a stormingly good Doctor Who story. There's nothing I can really, obviously there are some glaring bits in there that I'll talk about possibly as we go through it. But generally, the story's really good. Lenny Mayne, great direction, keeps the story whizzing along at quite the pace. And there's some fabulous, again, location work here, just across the road from me in Gloucestershire there, at the power station. But I think the fact they got into a power station and did that, it gives that story that sort of epic scale. And you've got these lovely scenes where Liz is walking through the power station and she's clutching the box with the hand.
Dressed as Andy Pandy.
Dressed as Andy Pandy.
Described, yeah.
But you know what? She just looks so lost when she's doing that. And she's just brilliant throughout this story. Yeah. Second story in, and like I said, hasn't been a bad one yet. This is also a really good story as far as I'm concerned.
When you say it's got a rollicking good pace, you don't think it sort of spends about 2 episodes just walking around a power station waiting for Eldrad to manifest?
I like all of that. I mean,
She goes through reactor 1, then 2, then 3.
There's a horrendous amount of padding before Judith comes and gives it a bit of life, I think. It's there's a lot. It's like, we've got a power station, let's walk around it, let's walk along it, let's walk up it, let's walk around it. If you break it down, I mean, I'm sorry if James is about to give us a scene-by-scene breakdown. Oh, come on, that's a joke. He actually looks quite affronted there. He looks quite affronted now.
James.
Go on.
Anyway, so yeah, I think it does. I think if this wasn't Sarah Jane's last story, I think people wouldn't be as impressed by it. I think there's a huge sway of it. People saying it's Liz's last story, and therefore, and I think if it weren't, if this were just the second story of the season, and they just took off at the end, it wouldn't be a thing. Because also there's that sort of, I think the last episode as well, and Stephen Thorne I usually think is amazing. I don't think he's bad at this. It's just you have that thing of he comes in for the last episode, and it's kind of like they just sort of trip him down a cavern, and it's also like, Castria's all gone, mate. All right.
I like the idea that it's been so long. So Eldrad's been sort of this fossilized hand for so long that her people have pretty much been wiped out. The Doctor takes her back to present day, refuses to take her back because he says it will break the rules of time, and you get to see the sort of consequences. And it's done in other stories, but I think it's done particularly well here, where she's like, "Oh, where is everybody?" And it's the Doctor says it's the sand underneath us, basically, as we're walking along. It's that's the people. The end bit where obviously Eldrad gets shot by that sort of giant needle, sort of spear thing, and injected with acid, and then has to go through this sort of regeneration and then comes back. It is a bit strange. However, I do like the other parts of the story. I love the bit at the beginning with the quarry. I think that's really quite a massive action shot, where they've got the Doctor and Sarah within the first few minutes being buried under tons of rubble, and I think it's done really well. And you're sat there going, where is Sarah? And when you see the scarf, and you're just thinking, oh, what, have they killed her off in the first scene? There's that immediate sense of danger. You don't really see what's happened to Sarah, apart from you see her underneath the rocks, and the next thing she's in an ambulance going to the hospital. And I think there is the element that you're sort of like, is she okay? Is she, has the Doctor's companion died, or it's been seriously injured? And then I am with Jason on this. I do like the shots of the power station. I think there is, it does go on a little bit, but the idea that she's just wandering around with this ring and just zapping anyone that gets in her way. And, it just seems, especially the way she's dressed as well, it just seems so out of place that she's just wandering around this nuclear power station, trying to get something to charge the hand. I think there's a particularly sort of gruesome death when the guy falls from the gangplank when he attacks the Doctor. Falls quite far onto the floor of the power station. It's Dr. Carter, I think that was. So there's some nice set pieces, but you've got that sort of part where they're in the nuclear power station, and then you switch to the Eldrad's planet. So I think it's a story that's got quite nice pacing in the fact that it moves location and carries on the story. I think there are some glaring holes in it. So, for example, a creature that thrives on radiation, is it the best thing to drop a nuclear bomb on it? I don't know. Yeah. And what happens to the bombs? You know, they get neutralized, but
there's a sort of unexplosion.
Yeah. You know, I was thinking about the aliens in Mars Attacks, you know, where the sort of nuclear missiles go up and then he sort of sucks in the helium and starts laughing in a really high-pitched voice. But
oh no, that is quite funny though.
You don't really know what you know, what happens to these nuclear bombs. But I was just sat there going, why is no one thinking that this would actually make things worse if you added to the radiation as this thing feeds on it? But I do like that. I do like the fact that you have the first part of the story, and then and there's a point where you almost think, I'm on Eldred's side. You know, there is a point where you're just like, oh, actually, I feel sorry for her. And Judith is brilliant. And you know, we've seen Judith at events recently, and she is wonderful. And I almost wish that she'd been Eldred all the way through, because that I agree, that last bit is a bit weird.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice maybe just to have seen the switch from having the good Eldred to the bad Eldred and just change the voice up or something. Yeah, no, I agree that I think Liz possessed, Sarah Jane possessed, works in a way that, say, Tegan turning into the Mara, Tegan's unlikable. She becomes even more unlikable when she becomes the Mara. So I think if you're Sarah Jane and you are really lovely and people like you, and then you start killing people, I think that's got a sort of dramatic effect to it. And I think that's the power of it, because she is this likable, lovable character, and that's the innocence of it.
And it's not over the top. You know, sometimes you see people get possessed in Doctor Who, and it's really badly overdone. And she is
Tegan is the Mara.
She's just skipping along. You know, she's just quite merrily just walking around. And there's some beautiful shots where they're doing it from sort of above her and from the side. You know, really nice.
No, there is great. There is some great camera work with it. You know, Lenny Mayne is you feel at times he's framing the camera in such a way that she's just looks so small and so lost in those scenes when she's in the power station. I agree about the Eldred swap at the end, because knowing Judith Paris the way that we do, and we know she's a brilliant actor. I think she would have been fabulous to be evil Eldred as well as nice Eldred, sort of thing. And I think that whole thing could have worked really, really well. So I actually agree that is a bit of a flaw in the story for me. There wasn't really any need to do that. I think the villainess as such could have gone all the way through the piece. I absolutely adore the costume and makeup as well for Eldred. She looks, I mean, literally, it's stunning. You know, Barbara Lane, Judy Neame, they both need a shout out for the costume and the makeup, I think, in this story. But the Eldred costume really, really, really good. See, again, the Stephen Thorne Eldrad costume, not quite so good. But, you know, Judith, I think, is a great supporting member of the cast here and lifts it up. And also just a shout out to the ever faithful Glyn Houston here in this story, because whatever you put Glyn in, he's brilliant. And he does get, you know, he puts a good turn in as Professor Watson here, you know, and there's that lovely touching little scene with him where, you know, all hell's breaking loose at the nuclear complex. He picks the phone up and gives his wife a call. And it's kind of like, oh, you know, not so well here, whatever.
There is,
you know, I think
it's his son, doesn't he? And he's like, okay,
yeah,
that's exactly it.
It's quite a nice sort of character piece, isn't it?
It is.
It's what the new series doesn't do. It doesn't make you care about people that are about to potentially die. I think that then frames him as a person with a family and a life, and it's a nice touch that they
very well done.
And it's unusual to see it as well, I think, in something like this, and it does add a little human factor there.
And you see, there's a scene where he's got a fly on his head when he's on the phone. If you watch carefully, there's a fly walking across his forehead, and there's an outtake where Liz Sladen swallowed the fly.
Oh,
my
so
God,
have you not seen
it's
the
another
very
story.
obvious-
Have you been on the dark web again for this?
Bloody hell, the quarks will come marching round the corner in a moment at this rate.
Did it originally happen in Thunderbirds that they had a fly that was eaten by Sarah Jane?
Oh,
I tell you what did strike me, and literally strikes the word here, is when the Doctor knocks Sarah Jane. He properly baffs her one, doesn't he? I don't know whether there's a bit of pent-up aggression there towards her, but he does crack her one when he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry," bam, and it's like, "Well, I think you could have done that a bit more gently, Doctor Who." Yes. Have we any more unusual facts, James?
yes, I've got a couple more
yes.
things. So the power station was originally going to be Newton Power Station, which is the same one from the Claws of Axos, but they changed it when they
blew up.
Well, yeah, but they changed the location for the power station. The last scene where Sarah's whistling, that's actually Lenny Main whistling because she couldn't whistle. So when at the final scene where she walks off whistling is Lenny Main whistling over the top because she couldn't actually whistle.
I think the final scenes in this story just need some mention, because the story goes that the Bristol boys didn't write the last scene. They wrote the story, but the last scenes, or the scenes for themselves, weren't written by them. They were added back. They were added in, and as the story goes, Tom and Liz had a hand in rewriting some of that to make those scenes work better for them, because they felt that it wasn't quite right. But it's the very first time where the Doctor is faced with that sort of thing where he has to say, "Sorry, you've got to go. I've got to move on. I've got to do something. I've got to go here, do this. You can't come on this." So there's a rejection there, isn't there? And when you look back at that, it's quite bittersweet in a way.
It's an awful rejection, though, isn't it? Because it's so baseless. He could say, "Okay, you can't come with me to Gallifrey. Wait 10 minutes and I'll be back," because he could collect her before he'd gone. I know they sort of picked that up in school reunion, but I sort of interjected, because I find that the playing against it, I find actually quite cold, and I don't buy it as an out. It's literally like he's not bothered. He doesn't even have a sort of a glisten. I find it a very cold exit for her, and I see that the worry is that they didn't want to do the Joe Grant, they didn't want full emotion, but they've gone so far back the other way, and it just doesn't ring true. It's almost like I could have understood if Sarah had been like, I must see whether so and so is well or not, or something's happened, and I could imagine her having an emergency. But when he's just like, "Oh, sorry, love, you got your stuff ready. I'll trot along then." There's no reason, if you were a viewer, as Jason wasn't then, that you wouldn't believe that he could have gone to Gallifrey and done what he was doing and then come back. That wasn't me having to go at Jason as being an old person. I just say, as a story flow, there's no reason why at the end of The Deadly Assassin, he wouldn't have gone back and said, "Poor Master was back, Sarah. What a freaking nightmare. Let's carry on." It's like he's sort of going, "Yeah, I'm rid of you now. Cheers. Let's have old leather."
I do like the conversation where they're talking out cross purposes, though, because she's all like, "I've had enough and I want to go." He's like tinkering away with the TARDIS. She goes off to go and get her stuff, and while she's gone, he gets the summons from Gallifrey. So when she comes back, he's like, "Oh, you must, this has worked out quite well because I'm about to kick you out." I don't think it's that cold, because I think there was a little bit of foretelling of it. However, I do think, by contrast to the Joe departure, it does feel very, very different. And like you say, maybe they've gone too far the other way, and the fact that, the Doctor was almost heartbroken after seeing Joe go, whereas Sarah's sort of just dumped in the street, basically.
That isn't South
Locked in Glasgow, isn't she?
She is. But at least she's whistling as she walks off. Well, she's not, but someone else is.
Yes. I think I'm actually with Paul a little bit on this one. I was coming on to say, and Paul's right in what he said. It's bittersweet, but it isn't a satisfying ending. At least we got more Sarah Jane, and as a direct result of that, we got a fantastic series. We got her back in Doctor Who, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, I think it's lucky that she did come back in a lot of ways. I mean, because obviously, Jo came back and she had a decent exit. There's just something that the Doctor Sarah were such good friends. They were like best mates there, and I just at the end of it just seems a really odd call, especially as what was to follow anyway.
I think like you say, because she'd agreed to stay on, maybe it wasn't as well thought out. She was originally, they were planning to kill her off at the end of the last season, so that would have been even worse.
But I think the problem is that you sort of, and I'm going to try and work this through quickly in my head. Jo Grant is the last of the actual decent goodbyes for a while, because Sarah Jane, Harry's just like, I've got a train ticket, I'm going home. Yeah. Sarah is like, go on, jog on, love. Leela turns around and marries the first person stood behind her. But Romana just decides to sort of linger with the Tharrells because she doesn't want to go back to Gallifrey. And again, that's sort of quite a rushed, is K9, see you later, love. It isn't, I think, until, they blow up Adric that there's actually some thought goes into, actually, they've been around a while now. Maybe we should give them a proper outro.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered that one.
But I think you're right, actually. I think, when you realize that your companion actor is leaving the series, you would think that they would go all out to write something that was very strong exit element to it. And this one, this one clearly was tacked a bit onto the end, because, as I said, it wasn't written by the writers who wrote the story. It was added at the end, and therefore it feels like maybe they were hoping she'd stay. Maybe they were hoping she'd stay another couple of stories. Who knows? Maybe that could be one of the reasons why he's companionless for the Deadly Assassin. They wanted that to be the last story.
He wanted to be companionless. That was what he asked for.
That's what he got.
Yeah, that's what he got, and didn't. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Spoilers.
He said in 40 years' time, Big Finish will need a pause where they can invent assistants for me. Could you just give me just one story where they can make up a whole run of assistants to join me? He said, of course, Tom, that's fortuitous. You like that.
You've got a TARDIS somewhere back in that office of yours, haven't you? Somewhere.
I have. It's yours for a good rate. Anything you see behind, it's all available. It's all available. So are we cruising towards a Castrian score?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Who wants to go first then?
Well, I'll go first, because despite the ribbing about the ending, I do like this story, and it is one that I am happy to watch any time, and so I gave it 8.5.
8.5.
I do actually like the story.
I mean, okay. Well, whilst Jason recovers from that, I'll merrily throw my score into the arena here. I think it's fine. I enjoy it. I think anything with Tom and Elizabeth, I'm going to enjoy. I don't adore it because I don't think it goes anywhere too excitingly. I think the setting, the power station setting for me is a bit drab. Castry is a bit cheap. I adore Judith. Amazing shame she didn't get another one. She even have they even brought her back for Big Finish with her old ring? They could have done all that anyway. So anyway, I don't know. I don't hate it. I just don't think it's amazing. So I have given Pandafia a 6.
And that's a very fair score. Okay, James. I mean, 8.5. That's you putting
It's
it out.
Sarah's last story. I'm not going to justify my
Yeah,
story.
I know it's her last story, but I mean, that's just a really random remit to give it, isn't it? It's got to be out because it's her last one. What?
I think he's
if her
adopted my
last one
score.
had been the Android invasion, would that have been a 10 or something?
I think he's adopted my scoring ratio here. I mean, I think there must be 6 in that score at least for the.
It's not strictly her last Doctor Who, is it? Because you've got the 5 Doctors, you've got Canine and Company, you've got Dimensions in Time, you've got the.
Look,
you've got
we're not
school reunion.
I
mean, she didn't stop coming back.
So don't start on my 8.5.
Now,
I'm
gentlemen,
my
please.
score.
Our dear viewer needs to know what we're scoring this.
Oh, Jason's not had his turn yet. Go on, Jason.
He's not. Eldrad will refossilize in the time it takes him to do it.
I don't know whether to do it as good Eldrad or bad Eldrad here. Who knows? Right. Okay. So, we've got 2 very quite diverse scores here. I like Hand of Fear. I think it's actually a good story. I don't think either of the first 2 stories of the season are bad at all. So, yes, there's a few glaringly obvious bits that aren't quite right, and every story's got some plot holes in there. But I do love the scenes in the power station. I think the quarry bits. I do think the direction's fairly good in this, and I probably think the budgets were blown a little bit with that explosion at the beginning. Some good guest cast, and it's Sarah's last story. Throwing all of that into the mix, there are some things I can't quite forgive in the story. So actually, unusually for me to score the same story, or to score the next story at the same score I've scored at previously, this is also coming in at 7.5.
I was trying to work out where you were going with that. It went round, but
I thought he was going to say, usually I'm scoring the same as P-Bal.
Exactly. But no. It wasn't.
No, I think 7.5 is fair on this, because I think both stories have got their own merits, and they're good, strong stories. I think 7.5 is a fair score,
which lands the Hand of Fear on a total of 22.
Very respectable. Very respectable.
And then we head on now to the last story of the first part of this video. So we're at the halfway point at the end of this. We have got the Deadly Assassin. So, who's taking on the Deadly Assassin? Other assassins are available. Maybe assassins that are a little bit cheeky, or the naughty assassin, or not all assassins are deadly. Some of them just kill. I'm all for an assassin that just kills someone. Not deadly.
Oh, shall I go? Is it my turn, Jason? So, as we have previously discussed, for me, my favourite stories were always the ones that have the interior of the TARDIS, something going on with Gallifrey, companions leaving, as we just talked about, or arriving. So in this story, you are introduced to the Time Lords. You are introduced to lots of different things about Time Lord society. You've got the Eye of Rassilon. You've got all the political figures. You've got this huge story that takes place on the Doctor's home planet. You learn so much about them during this story. Only story where the Doctor, in sort of this era, where he doesn't have a companion, as we just mentioned at the end of the last review. And I have to say, hand on heart, I really dislike this story, and it really pains me to say that, because I know a lot of people say that this is like a classic. I don't like it at all, and there are loads of elements that I think I should like, but I really struggle with. Discuss.
Jason, discuss.
How do I follow that? I thought you were building up there. I actually thought you were building up.
Oh, I have loads of notes, but
to having, and it's everything else.
Really,
and it's one of my most favorite stories, not one of my least favorite stories. So I am.
No, at this point is where I would be waving your Marmite, because for me, this story I just don't enjoy.
I mean, we do have a Marmite alert coming up, folks. So just stand by for action here, because Here it is, and the Marmite's out, but not for the whole story, in fact. Now, I think this story there are clearly some ambitions that we're trying to get in this story. And I'm going to be quite upfront and tell you, this is not in my top 10, top 5. This is not an all-time favorite for me. Again, I think this is a good story on the whole. However, you do get the whole Time Lords, you get the Eye of Harmony, you get the Rod of Rassilon, and you do actually get the Rod of Rassilon in this story, by the way.
You do?
You do, I know. I said it was in the 5 Doctors, as I recall, and I was incorrect, and everybody looked at me. But anyway, you build up this whole sort of, they build a foundation here that's built on for many, 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 many years to come. It does set some historical context to the Doctor, and if you look back and you look at the city and the design of the city, you'd think, yeah. But there's some good in this story because it grounds our hero, and we now know an awful lot more about our hero than we didn't know previously. So from a perspective of the story giving us some of that, does get a little bit OTT, I think, in later years, but it does give us that, and it gives us a wealth of knowledge that we didn't know. So it takes away a little bit of that mystery about our character. The story itself, I think it's fairly ambitious. I like episode 4 in particular. We'll talk about it a bit more. But for me, and this is where the Marmite klaxon comes in, what the screw was going on in episode 3? Because for me, the story doesn't need the Matrix episode, because it rips you straight out of the heart of the story. So great either side of it, but I personally do not like the breakout, and I appreciate there's some very iconic scenes there, and there's going to be a lot of people that are going to disagree, I think, with some of the comments we're making here. Again, don't forget you can comment below, but I just don't see the place in it myself. So yeah, good story on the whole. Couple of bits that I didn't like about it. Yeah, carries on what's a reasonably good series for me, season so far.
Oh, I think people could probably guess where I'm going to stand on the Deadly Assassin, given my propensity for enjoying Doctor Who when it gets violent and dark. I think Deadly Assassin is my least favorite classic series story entirely. I don't think there is one that I dislike more than the Deadly Assassin. I have never liked it. In the run up to this, I always it's funny because in my head I was like, I love season 40, and then I think, oh God, there's that kind of old saggy knickers in the middle between great things happening, and I've never enjoyed it, and I can remember it's never one I put on video, and then when it came on DVD, it's like, okay, I'll do it with the commentary, and it's different. But in the run up to watching it, I got to watch it again, and am I going to be changed? And I just find it unpleasant to watch, and Doctor Who to me should be quite hopeful. It should be quite positive, and this is such an unpleasant in so many parts of it. It's just unpleasant. I think I don't need. Do you know? I quantify this because I think people might think that I live in a sort of ditzy la la land with rainbows and unicorns, and I don't like anything that's unpleasant. I love a bit of violence. I would absolutely. I can watch. What's the Sloan thing? Christ. Anyway, I can watch like a big action movie if it's a theatrical, 100,000 people being mowed down machine guns. It's theatrical. It's big. It's what it is. I don't like it when it gets into. And I don't think Doctor Who is the format for this. I don't like it. I just think all the sort of the bits where he's got the leg wound and stuff, and then the Doctor. I mean, again, the Doctor to me shouldn't be the violent character. That's always the heart of it. Actually, is that he's always looking for the route out. He doesn't want to blow up the Silurians. He doesn't want people to die. So he shouldn't be strangling people and trying to drown them or trying to shoot them or stab them or poison them. And you get all of that in this, and it's horrible. And I get that I suspect in the office they'd all had a merry lunch. Thought, do you know what we really want to do? We're going soon. We want to do the proper action now. Let's see how far we can push this. And as awful as it is, I sort of sit there in my full Mary Whitehouse, go, oh no, and I just don't like it. I can't find like in it.
I'm in total agreement. And every time I watch it, I think I've got to find something that I like about this story. And maybe it's just me. And I'm so glad you said that, because I just really dislike it. And the cliffhanger where he's drowning the Doctor. Tom Baker suffers from aquaphobia. He suffers from a fear of drowning, and this is just how bad this story is. They end on a cliffhanger where he's being drowned. Not to mention the surgeon, the war surgeon. Then you've got the clown in the mirror. It's playing to all fears and phobias, but it's just so tackily done. The trains where he's got his leg trapped in the points, and the trains are coming at him, and then you've got the shooting, the drowning. There was just a series of cliche images of things that people find scary, but it was too much, and it doesn't sit in this story.
You're quite right, it doesn't sit in this story, because the whole of the Matrix sequence for me, however ambitious they wanted to be with it, it falls flat completely for me, and has it completely sucks you out of I think what's a reasonable story underneath this, by the way. So I'll come back to that in a second. The Matrix scenes are too much of a contrast, and you're right, the vivid imagery. There are two scenes that I remember watching this when I was a 6-year-old child. They've been ingrained in me and have been impressionable on me for as many years as I can remember. And I do remember the train track, the foot caught in the train track, and the train coming at him, end of episode 2. And I do remember the drowning sequence, because it was in there when it first went out, and obviously we had all the Mary Whitehouse complaints and what have you afterwards. But those two scenes were far too graphic, but they were also far too graphic. They were far too out of place. That whole sequence of episode 3 just feels like a massive filler. You don't need to go into a battle inside the Matrix where you're trying to, like you say, stab each other and shoot each other and, try and do all these things to each other. There are better ways that they could have realized this on screen. Great opportunity for them to go out and film and hire big planes in and whatever. It just doesn't have a place in this story. So with you entirely on this. I actually do think, though, that the story around it, for me, introduces some of the history. I think episode 4 is really strong. The Eye of Harmony's being opened, the city's being ripped, the Citadel's being ripped apart. You've actually got a set that's moving around. The direction element of this, I think, is good. And I think that the first episode, where you get the bits around the Tardis bays and all of that, I think that works quite well. It just gets a little unraveled when you've got the bits in the middle with the Matrix and the Master manipulating things. So it's a story of two halves for me, I think, on this.
But at the end, do you not think once the Master's running around, that there is no security on Gallifrey? So in the first episode, it's like the TARDIS is arriving. There are guards everywhere. It's like the TARDIS is arriving. Here's hundreds of guards. The Master starts running around the capital, picking up bits of Time Lord heirloom to do what he wants to do to end the universe. And there's no guards whatsoever. There is nobody apart from 2 old Time Lords and the Doctor to chase him. What is that? I mean,
even at the end, where they say, "Oh, look, the Master's TARDIS," and they're like, "Oh, surely he's dead," and you see just the Master's hand, and they go, and Engen goes, "Look, the Master." They don't do anything to try and stop him. They're just like, off he goes. It's like.
And I also, and I shouldn't have laughed because I did, because I'm the vicious old queen. There's a bit at the end where he stays with the Doctor and then he goes, "Oh, you'll get more of the same." I love the way he does that line. It's so bloody camp. It's like what was it? Was just I think the costume as well. Bless. I hate all this. I hate the decayed master thing. I hate. I understand that they thought it would be disrespectful to have someone else just straight playing the master because of Roger being dead. But then, is it that respectful then to have a decayed master because it's not exactly a pleasant image? You know, I don't know if one's mitigating the other one here.
It's not as good as the Keeper of Traken costume either, because Peter Pratt just sounds like he's speaking through a plastic mask. It's not very well fitted when you see it close up. I really struggle. Whereas in the Keeper of Traken, you really feel that the master is sort of, on his last legs and really, evil and manipulative. Here, in amongst everything else, I don't even like Peter Pratt's portrayal as the master. The bit at the end with the fight with the Doctor, where he's got the sash of Rassilon, which seems to just flick all over the place as he's fighting, and then he when he falls down the crevice, I'm like, hooray! It just.
Wouldn't it have been much better to have had a master who was human looking but suave and charming? He was at the end of his life, but he's charming and he's trying to persuade people in a manipulative way to extend his life, rather than him being this wretched creature that's just a very obvious kind of monster creature. It's just like, you could have done that so much more intelligently. You could have gone back to Gallifrey to run to be the president. He could have looked normal, been running, and then could have been revealed that he was the master. If he'd been Bernard Horsfall had revealed as the master, that would have been a much better twist on things. He'd been like, oh crikey, so he's done all this and this has been the game, rather than him skulking about with strange fish eyes and condom fingers. It's horrible. Yeah, I don't need that in my life.
I mean, let me just call out a little positive. So I love Eric Chitty and Angus McKay in this. They're like an old married gay couple.
George Prather's the other one in the duo.
Yeah.
And Tom obviously loves Eric Chitty because he does his voice, doesn't he, when he says goodbye to him.
There were some wonderful scenes there, when they were like, what's going on? And, they're slightly suspicious to begin with. And then they're sort of like, but the Doctor's a friend of Gallifrey and, that kind of thing. We were talking about references. It's the first reference to the Matrix, to the Time Lord chapters, to Barossa, to Rassilon. It's the first mention of the limit on regenerations. They talk about the old times. They introduce the CIA, which obviously is now, been reintroduced recently with the Timeless Doctor. The Seal of Rassilon, which was actually from the Vodans from the Cybermen story.
Cybermen, the Vogan on the wall.
Vogan symbol.
Yeah, which then becomes Gallifrey symbol.
But surely you say that there's some good in that, and I actually think there is, because what we've effectively done, like I said earlier in the piece on this, we have just invented, or we've just realized or visualized the Time Lords and all of their many many facets to this, aren't there? With all the sort of historical and they don't meddle in affairs and all of that sort of thing. But they've given the Doctor now a true backstory. That's got to
not all that adds to it, though, does it? I mean, when he turns up for the next couple of stories, there's not a resonance from this. It's just continuity baggage to drag up in future years, isn't it? You don't go the rest of the season isn't a result of this. Where you're like, and God, we know he's a Prydonian or whatever. It's like there isn't anything. I'm going to quote Sophie Ellis-Bextor here as a sacred text, in that magic stays where myth remains. Do you need to see the Time Lord's day-to-day life? Do you need that? Is there something quite magical about that they have this power, and that they've only been seen fleetingly and they've interrupted or they've intervened? There's a magic and a myth to not seeing everything. I think, sorry, I'll go on the full rant. I think that's one of my biggest problems with the whole Doctor Who ethos, is that we don't have to see everything. We don't need a story for everything. If the Doctor's been to Debts and once on the Abominable Snowman, I don't need to know the backstory for the last time he went. I can make that up. I can fill my gaps. I don't need to know what Bruce is having for breakfast to make me know that the Time Lords are powerful. I just think there's so much, especially I think within the Doctor Who world, where the arms are all up again. I think there's so much that comes into it where people overfill rather than letting you just go there with yourself. And I think that, to me, the danger with the Deadly Assassin and going, here are the Time Lords, here's the Time Lord continuity, is that then sets the precedent. You've then got all this Time Lord continuity next time you come back to it. And it just drags away from the sort of the magic, I think, of Doctor Who being a traveller and a bit mysterious, and that being the magic of it, rather than like he comes from a really dreary political background.
Well, now we're questioning where he comes from completely. But I think even the beginning, where you've got the scrolling text with Tom Baker explaining, the Time Lords have been at peace for ages. The whole thing is set up as, here is a whole load of folklore that you're going to be, embroiled in for many, many years. And yes, this would be the point where people start pointing backwards to this episode and go, well, no, they said in this episode it's 13 regenerations, or they said in this episode this. Is it needed? I'm not sure, and certainly not as much as you get here, which is like literally, here is the Gallifreyan text.
I absolutely agree. I like the fact that they have gone for that little bit of drama stuff with it. I do like that they're trying to build the atmos with the scrolling text, if it doesn't pay off. But I do like that as a dramatic thing. It's just I don't like. There's nothing that calls me to liking this. There's Eric Chitty. It's not enough. If I didn't have to watch this story ever again, I could live with that. I don't want to see it ever again. I could merrily just excise it from my own matrix and go from Hand of Fear through to Face of Evil. But I don't feel that I've got any call for it. It's even more of a kick in the teeth when you think, well, actually, he's dumped Sarah Jane to go and do this dreary four-parter. I mean, come on.
And we do miss her in this as well.
Well, I mean, when I did my degree at university, my thesis was, I did film and television, folks. My thesis was on the role of the companion in Doctor Who. So obviously, one of my case studies for that was the Deadly Assassin, because he doesn't have one. But he sort of does, because he uses Elgin and thingy as his...
And Spandrel.
Elgin and Spandrel.
So he does sort of, because you literally can't do a Doctor Who story without a companion or a companion figure, because he has to at some point turn to the audience and say, this is what this is and this is what it's going to do. And they have to go, oh, great, Doctor, and what else? It has to happen like that. You can't reinvent it. There are iterations of it. If you then have Romana being the Doctor, then the Doctor doesn't have to be the Doctor role. You can do it, but it's...
And I'm going to put a little bit more positive into it. I am going to give a bit of a shout out to Roger Murray Leach, who actually designed heavily in this story. And I appreciate that he'd previously designed what becomes the Gallifreyan symbol as the Vogan symbol from the Revenge of the Cybermen. It comes through, it makes a reappearance here, and that becomes what it is now. But again, I think design in this is very gothic, this story. Either side of the Matrix bits. It's very dark, and I think it's quite well designed. Now again, I know you guys aren't going to agree with me on this, but one of the things that I think does stand out well is Roger's work in this. It's a showpiece for him, and I think the whole design of the Time Lords sort of collars and robes, and the set itself. Not so much the master, but the set itself. Again, I thought it was. Again, I think it's well done, well executed, and I do think David Maloney's direction in this, again, with the exception of the bit that I'm not particularly keen on, which is the Matrix scenes. I think it's really quite good. So I'm not actually in the same position as you two on this one, apart from the Matrix elements of the story, which I agree with you on. I don't fully agree with the other aspects that you've been talking about. So I think it's quite good. I always quite like this when we have these points where we're not always on the same pages, and I think that's really important when we have these discussions, I think, around the series, because each and every one of us are going to see these things in slightly different ways. I don't think it's as bad for me, from my side. I certainly don't see it in perhaps the same viewpoint as you two.
I don't think the design's bad. I don't think the costume design, but I think, I wouldn't take away from the standard of the work. I also would then question, if you were the most powerful race in the whole universe, would you have such a depressing looking place? Would you not have it a bit more opulent? I know it sort of goes a bit Dallas, doesn't it, when it gets to the 80s? They've got the lounge furniture, and it all gets a bit kind of glitzy Gallifrey.
Fountains and bits of
a nice fountain on the way to your boardroom. It's had a makeover. And I get, but if you were the most powerful race in the whole universe, you'd have lights, wouldn't you? You'd be able to see what you're doing in the corridor, wouldn't you? You'd have, if you were having the pomp, you'd have a nice looking gaff, wouldn't you? And I think I get that for the purposes of the story, it has to look dark and it has to look miserable. But
I mean, in the Three Doctors, it's really funky, isn't it? It's all, round pieces of paper and perspex, and it's really 70s. Whereas it's really bland.
Well, I don't think I want to be misconstrued here. And I think what is important to remember in my analysis and my score of this, because my score is going to destroy everyone here, is that I'm not scoring it on how good I think it is as a production. It's how I feel about it and how I like it. And I think as a production, it's well acted. I'm not sure about Peter so much, but I think there's a lot of good performances in this. It's beautifully designed. It is well directed. You might not like the Matrix episode, but it's shot beautifully and it is done really well. I wouldn't take anything away from the standard of the directing, the acting, the music, anything to do with it. I just don't like it, and I don't like the story style. And it's a choice, really. It's your flavouring, and it's Doctor Who, and it's a well done Doctor Who. But as a flavour and as a style and as something that I react to on a personal front, I don't like it, and I would not want to watch it again. I don't have any desire to watch it again.
I almost feel I almost feel we're at a point where we should lay our cards on the table here, I think.
Okay, who wants to go first with their score then?
Well, I'm quite happy actually to probably go. No, yeah, I'm going to go first. I'm going to go out with this because ultimately I think your scores are going to differ from mine a little bit in this one. We're 3 stories into what so far for me hasn't been a bad season. It's been fairly strong throughout. Because this is a story of 2 halves for me, because I kind of like the bits before, the bit after the Matrix. I don't really see the need for the Matrix stuff in the middle of it in kind of the excessive way that it's in there and the violent way that it's in there. But I like the stuff around it. I like the direction. I like I very much like the sort of set design, all the production values of it. I'm loving all of that. So from my perspective, this story is on a par with the previous 2, and I would be looking to score Deadly Assassin at 7.5.
You just got the one score written down this week.
Well, I have. It does feel like I have, but I've sat and I've looked at I've worked these scores out very clearly tonight, and every story so far in the first three stories of this season, they've all been good. They've been strong. They've been strong stories, but they've all had elements in them that have let the story just down. So each story's got something I don't like about it. And I don't feel that, I should be marking stories down for any particular reason or up for any particular reason. They've all, for me, in this, it's so far been really strong. So that's why they've all actually got a same score, because that's how it's ended up being. So 7.5.
James, where are you at on the Deadly Assassin?
I really want to like it, but I really don't. For many of the reasons I have stated already. I love horror, I love dark things, but this, is, I don't know, it's too jarring, and it doesn't sit well with me, and it is an uncomfortable watch. And there aren't many Doctor Who stories where I find I just want to skip it. There are Doctor Who stories that I don't particularly love, but I'll watch because, either the performances or something about it that I do like. This is one where I did sit through it, and I'm not in any rush to watch it again. So I even hate this score, but it reflects what I feel of it, and it's a 2.
Jason looks a bit horrified.
Come on, James. It's worth more than a 2.
We must respect each other's scores, Jason, on these things.
Oh, I absolutely agree, and I will respect scores because I'm not. I'm not. It means nothing to me, but I do feel that we've all got our ways that we look at different stories, and I know you've been shocked at some of the scores I've given. That's exceptionally low, and I'm surprised a little bit at it. And I do respect your score, James, but I am surprised by that.
There are few stories where that I feel that strongly about, but this is one of those stories for me.
I think for me, one of the biggest things I've always liked about Doctor Who is actually the companions in a lot of ways. I've always sort of associated better with the companions of the Doctor. If I were to choose to be Doctor Who or one of his plucky assistants, I'd rather be a plucky assistant. Maybe that says more about me than I need to say, but it's a big thing. I've explained the reasons I don't like this. I don't say it's a bad production. I don't say it's embarrassing. I just don't like it. I don't want to watch it. I don't need it in my life. So if you're worried that James's score was a little harsh, I am giving The Deadly Assassin
1.
It's like a 10, but without the 0.
We've had the highs and we've had the lows in this first installment.
I knew this season was going to separate us.
I can almost hear that moment is killed Adric. Should we roll the credits over the silence now? Apologies, viewers, if you do enjoy Doctor Who and the Deadly Assassin. It's just not for me. Which gives the Deadly Assassin a impressive 10.5. It must be what it's like to be the United Kingdom at Eurovision. It really must.
I know how it now feels. I think personally, and again, I'm not disrespecting either of your opinions or either of your scores, but I feel that they're low scores. And I know all the reasons why, but 10.5. The Deadly Assassin is worth more than 10.5.
Jason's playing to the comments below, isn't he? I can feel it.
Dear viewer, I genuinely feel that I like this story enough to be able to say this, but it's worth more than 10.5.
But you did the same as the two stories before, so you felt like you championed it as a classic. Do you know what I mean? You said that the other two were sort of fairly strong to average stories, and you've given this a strong to average.
Exactly right. I've done that because, as I said, I think episodes 1, 2, and 4, and some of the history that's brought out, some of the performances in this, and the set design and the ambition of the direction in this story, I think was good enough for a 7.5 in this instance, because I like large parts of this story. I waved the Marmite around at the beginning of this and did a Marmite alert because I don't like the Matrix scenes.
That's 25% of the story. That's quite a chunk. So I don't think it's necessarily that much of a surprise that if we didn't like the Matrix bits and the 3 parts around it, that we wouldn't ringingly endorse it. Maybe.
I do love it when we have these differences. I really think it's good, and it shows that every time I always caveat it with this, but I always say it's good that as fans we don't all have to like the same thing, and I think that's great when we have these discussions and we review. Each and every one of us has different views, and I like that. I think it's quite refreshing.
we're leaving the audience hanging for a whole week on this discussion of how we felt about the last of the stories in this part.
Well,
we might be back.
Glowing tribute to Mary Whitehouse on the 30 years, isn't it? That's the image she was left in the mind of viewer.
This is the freeze frame bit. We'll do a freeze frame bit, shall we, at the end of this and hold them for a week on it?
It was almost as if they were a bit dumb. Iconic. Now that almost makes it worth having the Deadly Assassin exist just for that Mary Whitehouse clip. So the end of part 1 of our 2-part video. I mean, please come back if you want to hear more of the same. We have got Deadly Assassin in 3rd place on 10.5 and Hand of Fear in 2nd place on 22. And currently, hurrah, look, I'm going to drag him up again. He's currently in the lead and he knows it. He knows it. It's Masque Mandragora 25.5. But there are 3 stories to go, so it could all change. So, see you again.